I've gone through this internal debate as you get in the crypto space for a couple of years. You start to wonder, is this the right thing? Is this the right sector to support? And you always want to think about all the negative externalities that might come with something like crypto, just like you would getting into investing in stocks or anything else. As I went through my own journey around it, all the while I do find a lot of interest in proof of stake and other consensus mechanisms. I think the core question of whether or not proof of work is good or bad is one that has a lot of nuance behind it. So the first immediate conclusion that most people come to is actually, Hope had hinted to earlier, is that most governments immediately see it as something that's bad, it's wasteful, and doesn't provide any value. I was quite strict when I went on my journey towards trying to answer this question. I didn't buy a lot of the mainstream arguments. Some of the ones saying that, well, there's the traditional banking sector that wastes so much more energy if you consider ATM and the paper printing of new money and all the debit cards and all the existing banking infrastructure. I think that's a non-argument because I think that what the banking system offers, whether we like the banks or not, is still much larger and much more day-to-day than what Bitcoin offers. So there's a lot of arguments like that got tossed around, or maybe, for example, the one that it's purely worth the store of value, right? I think, again, those arguments alone aren't enough here towards really critiquing proof of work. And what we need to get down to is a candid analysis on what powers the Bitcoin network. And once we understand what powers it, and i.e. specifically whether or not it's really as environmentally destructive as people say or not, then we can start to understand, hey, the value that Bitcoin offers, this store of value, is it worth it? So I wanted to go ahead and do that healthy digestion into it. The first thing that I think I came across that made me a lot more supportive of proof of work is that a lot of the energy that is going into basically fueling the Bitcoin network and proof of work overall is wasted energy. So I remember one of the few advanced classes I took in high school was AP Environmental Science, probably one of the simpler AP classes in the US. But I found a really interesting passion around energy and understanding how it plays a role in the world. And one of the clear things I realized is that there is a ton of waste from the point of energy extraction, refinement, and basically processing it and delivering it towards the point where it's gas at the gas station for our cars. It's natural gas within our homes to keep us warm during the winter and also to power our cooling devices during the summer. And all this waste that's within the existing infrastructure has really not been tapped into. I think, again, if we were to even take mining out of the equation, this is a multi-$100 billion industry potentially to find ways to basically either reduce or make use of this energy. I.e., there is a huge part of the energy production process, renewable or non-renewable, that is causing a lot of environmental impact with no added benefit. The cool thing is that Bitcoin taps into this. Bitcoin is starting to find a whole range of use cases that it can tap into what was previously wasted energy and make use of it. So one example that I think, Eugene, you hit on perfectly on Twitter, and this, again, really sparked my interest back into the topic, is in the traditional oil transport and refinement process, you've got oil being transported through various pipelines. And the problem is that eventually, not all that basically, whether it be natural gas or oil, basically isn't being utilized. And there's an emission, basically, in this case, of methane, which is much more effective on the environment and a much higher greenhouse gas emitter versus CO2, if we're just talking in pure scientific terms, that would just originally go wasted and wasn't able to be utilized for power consumption in the United States, for example, where they found this use case. And now they were able to, on a localized level, utilize that flare gas in order to power Bitcoin miners. So now you're able to, as I'll talk a little bit later about my third point towards it, is turning electricity into basically, in this case, money, or it's a battery in this case, if you will, for wealth. I think what's so incredible about that is it's not adding any net emissions. So the only waste you've got at that point is the hardware device, the miners or the ASIC miners that are actually helping to do the computation. The energy consumption, on the other hand, is out of the question. So I think this is really exciting. And we've not just seen this here within flare gas. I know people will be like, that's a nuanced argument. Could there be other use cases? And I would say absolutely. Whether you're talking about a non-renewable, like we just talked about there, the flaring of gas. On top of that, there's also renewable energy that just simply isn't able to be used. I give a great example. I think it's somewhere in Siberia They're utilizing massive hydroelectric plants that basically no longer serve their purpose anymore, likely due to the fact that the community doesn't need that energy. Maybe the community has downsized over time. Huge amounts of electricity that's completely clean and would just be sitting there, not being utilized, can now be utilized for, again, a commercial venture in this case, at no added cost to the environment outside, again, of the production of the miners, which is minor comparative to the energy concern. So this is something that, again, touches into both renewable and non-renewable energy, which, again, I think both energy sources are going to be relevant in the world, no matter if we like proof of work mining or not. But they're able to take upon all this wasted energy within the energy sector in order to make Bitcoin mining not only less of a lag on the environment, but also economically more beneficial for Bitcoin miners, because a lot of these energy sources are cheap. They come at one of the lowest rates possible on the market versus using really expensive fossil fuels or using energy that wasn't going to be wasted. I can't tell you all of any mining operation I've read, as I've tried to dig through, that's purposely just trying to burn natural gas or coal or oil, for that matter, all the fossil fuels that can contribute to increasing emissions. Because it just doesn't make economic sense. You'd be paying much higher rates for your energy, which is probably the biggest cost outside of the more predictable hardware cost. So that's point number one there. I think the second thing to consider too is that it is clear through various studies, whether, again, you've got politicians who believe one thing or another, it's clear through the evidence that the majority, and not per se a majority, but at least a growing number, and I think soon to be a majority, of the energy consumption by cryptocurrency miners is going to be renewable. It's not only just something that a lot of miners care about. I think we have to remember they're people too at the end of the day, but it is economically, undoubtedly, the most cost effective. And there's a big reason for this. The biggest problem with renewables, and I say this as someone who invested in solar stocks back when I started investing in 2011, it was my passion to invest in renewable energy and a lot of trending macro sectors. The biggest problem with renewable energy is the battery issue of storing excess electricity. You have, for example, for solar panels, you have this kind of bell-shaped curve during the day where you've got peak sunlight, peak energy for those photovoltaic cells to be able to convert this potential energy into real energy on the grid. And that's a really big problem that is still yet to be solved for. Same goes for wind. There are different days and times of the day where wind energy is just simply going to be easier to generate than others when it's more windy than not, right? And I've seen this as I've lived in Europe. You can see some wind turbines not really turning, and then you see some days they're purring along and generating a ton of electricity. So understanding this inefficiency, you can see very quickly how crypto could really benefit from this, but also as well, not just benefit from ridiculously low energy costs because there's an excess of supply during the day, but on top of that as well, can start to stabilize the grid as well, setting in a consistent level of demand, in this case, for these renewable technologies. And I think that, ironically enough, what people miss is that this is going to bolster further adoption of renewable energy in the economy. It's not just going to be this kind of patchwork. It's going to be a real serious demand setter for renewable energy and is going to encourage investment in the sector. It's going to encourage investment in renewables because now renewable manufacturers and those who are distributing it and installing it on for various grid providers for various jurisdictions, they're going to have a better monetary incentive to actually provide these technologies. It's going to make it more financially feasible. So again, this was, big eye-opener. And I want to make it very clear for me, when I was looking through this question, I took that very cynical mindset. I'm a big fan of proof of stake. I'm a big fan of a lot of the emerging consensus mechanisms. But proof of work isn't as bad as the rep people give it. It's not as bad as the narrative that people have shared for these reasons.